Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 167, cover dated March 1983. And this is a very somber cover featuring Cyclops holding the limp body of Professor X, and the expressions and body language on the other X-Men imply that he's dead. So a really great cover. Everybody's standing more or less on the same horizon line except for Cyclops, who's a little closer to us there. Great poise in the figures, and I really like the slumped shoulders on Storm and Wolverine there. Really well done. And the decision to have those bare trees in the background too. A nice and iconic image. Let's open this one up to the first page. So what has happened on Earth while the X-Men have been away in space fighting the Brood is that Professor X has put together a new team, a second generation of young mutants, the New Mutants, and here are the founding members of the team. Sam Guthrie, Rain Sinclair, Danielle Moonstar, Jeanne Koyman, and Roberto da Costa. And they're watching TV, and because it's late 1982, they're watching Magnum PI. And there's nice little bits of characterization where Sam there says, "Way to go, Magnum, look at that man move." And then the women there are more interested in his looks. Danny says he sure is cute. And Rain, little insight into her character. "You shouldn't have think such thoughts, Danny. They're not proper. He's very handsome though." So quite amusing. And in the narrative caption, "They're not the first to be taught by Xavier, himself a telepath, the strongest mutant mind on Earth, but they may well turn out to be the last." Because what happened at the end of the previous issue, the double-sized 166, is that Wolverine conjectured that when the Brood Queen talked about how a queen embryo was implanted on someone on Earth, the only candidate that it could be is Professor X. One last thing I want to note about this page before moving on to what is an amazing double page spread is the interesting choice by Paul Smith to draw the X-Mansion, but from the backyard perspective. So we see the swimming pool there in the backyard. So that's an interesting decision of his. But turn the page and we get an amazing double page spread. Here we go. The X-Men are home and they're blasting their way into the living room. And if you're wondering, well, why is that? It's because time is of the essence. And if the professor has been metamorphosized, they want to surprise the Brood. So the title of the story, The Goldilocks Syndrome, or Who's Been Sleeping in My Head. And the creative team, Chris Claremont, writer, Paul Smith, penciler, Bob Wiacek, inker, Andy Yankus and Glynis Wine, colorists, and Tom Orzechowski, letterer. For the X-Men have come home and they're out for blood. And that's it. Look at this. Like, Claremont doesn't add any more words to this double page spread because he doesn't need to, because it is so eloquent in and of itself. And a great difference between the heroic poses of the adult X-Men and then the stunned reaction of the kids and the popcorn flying here in the foreground. Really great stuff by Paul Smith. Let's continue with the story, get past these advertisements. The New Mutants, they've only had the most elementary of training, but they go into action straight away. And Cannonball is the one carrying out, or sorry, rather giving the orders. "Pick your targets, people," he says. "I'll take care of the big fella." So he goes after Colossus and knocks him out into the woods behind Professor X's mansion. Meanwhile, Cyclops blasts away with his optic beam, but we get in his thoughts an explanation for what is going on here and why the X-Men are attacking without talking. These kids have guts, he thinks. They obviously don't recognize us. Could it be that Charles hasn't told them about the X-Men? I wish we had time to explain, but the slightest delay could prove fatal. So he warns them that he means them no harm, but they should hit the floor and stay out of their way, and they'll be okay. Meanwhile, Kitty Pryde is upstairs. She's making her way up and thinking to herself, what if we're wrong about the professor? What if we're making a terrible mistake? Then we pick up with the New Mutants using their powers. So Psyche, that's Danny Moonstar, is the first to follow Cannonball's example. Her side power pulls forth the image of Cyclops' most primal fear, his optic blast going uncontrollably wild. This sudden confrontation throws him off balance only momentarily. Then Rain transforms into her wolf mode and attacks Nightcrawler, and Sunspot tries to get the better of Wolverine, but he is knocked unconscious by Wolverine, and Wolverine stalks his way up the stairs thinking Charlie may be robbing the cradle, but he hasn't lost his touch. If these kids had the skill to match their spunk, they'd be dangerous. But he's stopped in his tracks by Karma, the oldest of the New Mutants. She possesses people, but it's a battle of wills here. She's thinking, he's breaking my hold on him. C'est impossible. That has never happened before. So upstairs we have Kitty, and she's about to make her way into the professor's private office. And she is in her thoughts going over the events of the previous issue. And then she spies the professor. There's the professor, and he looks human. Thank heaven I don't have to shoot. Hey, wait a minute, how come he's asleep? If that scrap in the living room wasn't enough to wake him. So she calls his name Professor, and then we see this evil grin on his face. You should have heeded Wolverine's injunction, child, and fired. Your hesitation will cost you dear. So it doesn't work out for her. She blasts away, but it's probably too late, yes. And then downstairs we've got Roberto da Costa. He's getting back up again. Interesting choice of Paul Smith's to have a borderless panel there. And da Costa has an interesting way that his power is rendered, his thermonuclear power, his energy drawn from the sun. He attacks Wolverine again, but Wolverine's impressed. You can see that grin on his face there. Nice try, boy, he says, but no cigar. So he clocks Roberto in the jaw again, probably knocking him out. And meanwhile, we've got this fight between Rain and Nightcrawler, but Nightcrawler teleports away and he bangs the heads together of Danny and Jian. So that would appear to take out the New Mutants, but what has happened to Kitty? Well, she is knocked from the second floor into the living room. Interesting little detail there in the art where her gloved hand is reflected in the mirror. Nice attention to detail. She's dropped to the ground, and then the professor arrives with that evil, demonic look on his face. Greetings, X-Men. What a pleasant surprise. I've long hoped for such a meeting, but despaired of it ever coming to pass. You need not fear for the youngling. She's beyond help. Fear rather for yourselves. So here we get this really cool transformation scene, this metamorphosis of the professor where he slumps forward in his wheelchair. The wings extrude from his back and he begins turning into a brood monster. This is a really horrific panel here of his jaw opening, the tongue, the fangs, and then interesting choice by Smith. He reverses the angle and we're looking down at Nightcrawler and Cyclops in the living room, and the brood begins making its way down. Does my form displease you, X-Men? It asks. So let's get past these ads here. And this is some pretty cool stuff now where the brood is flying there, its wings going outside the panel borders, it's threatening or promising rather, to kill the X-Men, and Cyclops responds with an optic blast to coin a phrase, won a bet, and knocks the brood right out the back of the mansion, where it's seen by Colossus hitting out in the fields towards the woods. And Colossus goes straight after it. The creature is not even stunned. I must not let it escape, he thinks. And of course, because this creature has the professor's telepathic powers, it knows his thoughts. And how will you stop me, human? It says, when my mental powers enable me to read your every thought, to counter your plans the moment you conceive them. This is a great shot of the New Mutants running out of the house. It's Karma and Danny running out, but also there you've got Wolverine and Cyclops, and you've got Nightcrawler teleporting out. And interesting, just the perspective. We've got the diving boards there, the steps up to the diving boards, the different levels, and Paul Smith hasn't forgotten about them. So it's a really well composed image, and a great top-down angle on the brood holding up with its tentacle, Colossus who's gripped around his chest with his arms pinned to his sides. And the brood boasts, your cause is lost, X-Men, for all your vaunted strength. X-Men, for all the vaunted strength of his armoured form, Colossus could no more prevail against me than Cyclops, nor will the rest of you fare any better. So he throws sorry, not Cyclops, but Colossus, and Wolverine lands on top of him. And when the Brood suggests that the X-Men flee, Wolverine says, Riley, sounds like sensible advice, the kind I've been ignoring since I was born. We've come a fair piece for this scrap, sleazy. And then there's a great anchor image coming up of Wolverine. He's going to bounce off. So this is interesting. You know, going back to the Cockrum and Byrne days, most especially Byrne days, you had the fastball special where Colossus would hurl Wolverine at an enemy. And now he's going to bounce off of Colossus, who isn't throwing him. But here we get this amazing anchor image of Wolverine leaping towards the Brood Queen with his arms outstretched and those claws breaking the panel borders. And you can see that many artists were influenced by this particular pose, most particularly Jim Lee. And he cuts off the stingers of the Brood. So in the previous issue, the Brood Queen caught Wolverine with her 2 stingers in his back. This time he goes for those stingers straight off. So I like that thoughtfulness from Claremont here in the script. The Brood is enraged, fiend for that. I will rend the flesh from your unbreakable bones. I will feast on your living heart. Karma tries her power on the Brood, but it doesn't work. Then it flies up into the sky, and this is a great page here. I like the layout on the page, the tall vertical panels, 6 of them. So the Brood is flying away with its stingers cut off, and then it's met by Binary. And I like the arc that Paul Smith is drawn in for Binary's flight, and the use of a screen tone there as well, indicating the nighttime setting. So she introduces herself and punches the Brood straight in the jaw. There's no escape. And then Storm gets in on the action and catches the Brood in the ultimate blizzard. So the Brood is frozen and drops to the ground. Great sequence, great fight sequences from Paul Smith. He's really good at it, at the fight choreography, and he'll only get better. So now it would appear the fight is over. The Brood is down, unconscious but not dead. And now here's an interesting scene where Cyclops says he's got dibs on putting the Professor out of his misery. And he says, I was the first X-Man. It's my right, my responsibility. And then he says, forgive me, Professor, if there was any alternative, but the Professor speaks through the Brood. There is none, Scott. And so Scott asks Professor, and the Professor replies, yes, mental transformation incomplete. Been resisting all my might. Shock of Storm's assault enabled me to gain upper hand. Eventually, though, Brood persona will overwhelm me. That must not come to pass for the good of Earth, of humanity. Kill me, Scott, I beg you. So Wolverine says, you heard the man. He's ready to do the job. But now Cyclops feels there's some hope. He says, I also heard Phoenix play this riff before she died, back in Uncanny X-Men 137. I never had a chance to save the woman I loved. I'm damned if I'm going to watch Charles Xavier go the same way. So long as there's hope, no matter how slight, the X-Men fight to preserve life, to create rather than destroy. And this is fantastic, this bit here. So he asks generally any objections, and Wolverine responds, lots. Storm, none. And then the New Mutants in the background, Sam and Danny. So that's Cyclops. Wow, says Danny. They're impressed with him and his command of the team. But also it's great, that little return from Wolverine. Lots, and Storm, none. Good stuff. So later aboard the Starjammer in Earth orbit. So that's the end of the action-packed opening of the issue. Second half of the issue is much more focused on the emotional relationships between the characters and the question of whether the Professor is going to survive somehow. So he's handed over to Sikorsky with Moira MacTaggart supervising, and their plan is they're going to try and clone a new body for the Professor and have a psychic transplant of his mind from one to the other. So that's what they're about. In the meantime, there's reunions aplenty. So Kitty has come too, and Colossus is there to greet her, but also Illyana. So everybody's delighted, hugs all around. But Storm here is observing from the other side of the room, and she's got some thoughts that are a little bit different. I shared this vigil too, Kitten, she thinks, yet your thoughts are of your best friend and the man you believe you love, where once they would have been of me. It is only natural. Change is an essential part of nature, and this one I've long expected. But now that it's actually happened, why do I feel so alone? And great body language for that too, and the expression on her face in Smith's art. And then these are a really nice couple of pages with the art. Classic 6 panel grid on this page, but nice command of our point of view in each of the panels. So we have Storm emerging from Kitty's room, and she's really tiny there, and it emphasizes how alone she is, her solitude. But she upbraids herself in her thoughts. Wind Rider, stop pitying yourself. I had no right to assume the role of parent, though I did so gladly. But I coped before, albeit in blissful ignorance, and will do so now, she thinks to herself. And then she sees Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's looking out of the observation deck on, is it the Starjammer ship or is it Lilandra's yacht? I'm not sure which one it is. But Storm asks if she's intruding, and Nightcrawler gallantly says, never, dear lady, your presence is always welcome. So that cheers Storm up. And then we have a shot of the New Mutants below, and they're looking out the observation deck as well, and they're amazed. It's probably their first time in space and looking at the Earth. And Danny there says she can see her mountains. And Nightcrawler says the jury is still out. So Nightcrawler and Storm are above observing them. The jury's still out on whether or not they'll accept me. It's one thing to watch someone like me on a cinema or television screen, quite another to share a dinner table with him. So Nightcrawler always cognizant of his kind of demonic appearance and how that puts people off and frightens them. But Storm says it's her turn to comfort him. She reminds him, Kitty was frightened of you at first, she got over it, so will they. And again, great command of the storytelling, where up above them at a higher level is Scott and his father Christopher, and they're having a heart-to-heart. And Cyclops asks his father, what are your plans? Will you remain on Earth? And Christopher says, for a while. There are people to see, years to catch up on, but those years are the main reason why in the end I'll return to space. I've been away too long, Scott. This isn't the world I remember. I'm decades behind the times, yet centuries ahead of them. Christopher Summers, Major US Air Force, is no more. I'm Corsair. Earth isn't my home anymore. The Starjammer is. And then this is interesting from Cyclops. His response is, when you leave, will you take me with you? And Christopher says, if that's what you want, then gladly. But in the meantime, and here's a surprise for Scott, I've run some checks. Anne's, your mother's folks are dead, but mine are going strong. Interested in meeting your grandparents? So Scott is amazed, and good expression on his face as well, to learn that he has grandparents. This boy who spent most of his youth in a orphanage and felt very lonely there is learning that he's got more of an extended family than just his brother Alex. So they have a hug there, and that is Scott and his father reconciled with each other after the whole Brood adventure. And then we have a little bit of a surprise here where Gladiator arrives, and it is the Starjammer. So he arrives and he's rude. He says, pirate, I demand to see the Magistrix, Empress Lilandra, at once. So Corsair puts him in his place and he says, on my ship, Lord Praetor, you do not demand of me, you ask. So and this is an interesting bit here. Raza says, thou hast e'er been ill-mannered, cousin. And Gladiator responds, have a care, renegade. So these are related. Madame Hepzibah makes her point. We like you too, Imperial. Care to argue point? So now he changes his tune. Another time, Lady Hepzibah, with pleasure. Corsair, I crave an audience with my Empress. So now we get into some Marvel continuity where Gladiator has some news. He says that Deathbird is ruling in the Shi'ar Empire, so Lilandra's going to have to sort that out. but he's got something else that he has to say as well. There's more. Upon arrival here, I unintentionally came into conflict with the Fantastic Four, and that was in issues 249 and 250 of the John Byrne authored and drawn series. I later learned that they had recently encountered Galactus. And, he says, Magistrix, the Shatter of Worlds, had returned to Earth to die. So she asks, then his threat is finally ended. Would that it were. With the intervention of Reed Richards, Galactus was restored to health, given a new herald, and set free. So she is absolutely enraged. She smashes her wine glass there. That meddling, unmitigated fool. Now this is interesting stuff because there's a bit of back and forth now between the former collaborators, Claremont and Byrne. Claremont was unhappy that Byrne had revealed that the Doctor Doom who encountered Storm and the X-Men in the Dave Cockrum drawn issues 145 to 47 was a robot. And so Claremont is having a bit of fun now and creating a problem for Byrne over on his title, New York City, the Baxter Building, home of the world's greatest superhero team. And so now we've a scene set there. So Lilandra projects a holographic three-dimensional image of herself where she addresses Reed Richards rudely in his bedroom where he's sleeping with his wife, and she introduces herself and says that she's been informed of his crime. So Sue asks, crime? What crime? And here we go. She says, "No, Susan Richards, that Galactus is the enemy of all that lives, for he destroys those most rare and precious of resources planets capable of supporting life, and that by saving him, you've branded yourselves his allies. Should he consume any such world known to us, you will be in part responsible for that Holocaust and will be held accountable for it to the fullest extent of Shi'ar law." So Ben and Johnny arrive, and then basically Lilandra says, "Consider this fair warning," and she ends the projection. She's gone. Good riddance, says Sue. But Byrne will make some story out of that where Reed Richards will go on trial. He will go on trial in the Shi'ar Empire. And yeah, that particular issue of Fantastic Four, The Trial of Reed Richards, I can't remember off the top of my head the issue number of Fantastic Four, but it's coming soon from Byrne, so he'll respond to this. And as I said, make a good story out of it. As Lilandra's image fades from view on Earth, so too does the armor created by the Starjammer's hollow system to clothe the image. So she emerges from the machine that created and directed that holographic projection. This is a really nice shot of the Starjammers, of Gladiator, everybody standing on the same horizon line. It's very, very nicely done. And again, here we have everyone on the same horizon line, but more of a worm's eye angle, and that's really done well too. And now, in the midst of everything, the Professor arrives in an automated mechanical wheelchair. It's kind of like the forerunner of the one that Jim Lee would design for him for X-Men #1. And everybody's delighted to see him, most particularly Cyclops. And here, the Professor stands up out of the chair. "So, how is this possible?" He says, "The reason I could not walk, as some of you know, was that my legs had been crushed beyond all possibility of repair. But as you can see, my new body is in perfect condition." So he says, "For the first time in over 15 years, I'm a whole man." And that's interesting because that was seeded in issue 165, where Moira was thinking that the Professor had never really been himself since the loss of his legs, the ability to walk. So now he's got that ability back, but not 100%, because he keels over almost immediately. And the reason for that is he's not used to walking. And we get an even denser explanation here where he says that he was always in pain, so he used his telepathic powers to block the pain. The nerves were badly traumatized from when his legs were crushed. The slightest pressure, even the attempt to stand, meant unbearable agony. Now, though, there is no physical pain, A psychosomatic response evidently exists, as crippling as the original. I can walk, but my mind won't let me. Okay, so he's got something to overcome now, so they help him back in his chair, and Kitty makes the point, well, you're going to have to join his training in the danger room. Lilandra is going to help him get back on his feet, literally. Moira MacTaggart is there to say that if Lilandra's TLC doesn't do the trick, I'll kick you in the butt. So trust us, Charlie, we'll have you on your feet in no time. So that's all great. And now the professor makes a kind of a formal introduction to the New Mutants. They're in their school uniforms, and then he's got an announcement to make. There's an additional benefit to the introduction, he says, of the New Mutants. At last, Kitty will be able to study with children her own age. So that's a surprise to her. And she says who? I'm an X-Man. And the professor says, that was an oversight and an error on my part. You're too young, Kitty, and too little is known about your powers. In the X-Men's primary role of combating evil mutants, the risks are too great. That I cannot allow. As soon as we return to Earth, you are to leave the X-Men and join the New Mutants. My decision is final. So that's a shocker to the X-Men and to readers of the title at the time. And that's a really nice close-up on Kitty. He really does do a good young version of her. Like, she's only supposed to be 14 and a half around this time period. And Paul Smith does a very, very good version of her. Next issue, Kitty's reaction, or Professor Xavier is a jerk. So that's 23 pages of story in this issue. Good value, and so no space for any letters page. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 167. Let me know your thoughts on this issue in the comment section to the video. If you enjoyed my review, please like the video on YouTube. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.